We are going to create our first cutscene. This cutscene is a sleeping guard interaction where Darren walks up to the security desk and grabs the keycard without disturbing the guard. This section will introduce you to Timeline and Cinemachine. You'll discover virtual cameras, which are used to compose our shot, and you'll create timeline tracks, which are used to create an animation sequence for our cutscenes. This all starts with blocking our scene, placing our actors, and preparing the shoot. You'll learn a few techniques along the way, such as the rule of thirds, which will massively improve the composition of your shot. Now we're going to start building out our game by building our cutscenes. When creating cutscenes in Unity, there are two parts. There's Timeline, and then there's Cinemachine. Timeline is a animation track that is just a sequence of events. So for instance, you can have a timeline track that lasts 5 seconds, and within that 5 seconds, you could play an animation, you could play a sound, as well as you could manipulate some cameras. Okay, it's just an animation track that has a bunch of animation events. Then you have Cinemachine. Cinemachine is your camera, it's your director. So it allows you to create a dynamic camera system using what's known as virtual cameras to create cinematic shots. And it works with Timeline because Timeline will allow you to blend those cinematic shots and create dynamic cuts. So we're going to be working with both of those tools to create these interactive cutscenes. So the first cutscene that we're going to be creating is the sleeping guard cutscene. So in this lecture, you will find a PDF to download called Sleeping Guard. I highly recommend you do that as it has director notes on what we're going to be creating. So what I'd like to do for you now is demo the cutscene that we'll be creating.
When I see one, quick, grab his card.
In this shot, we have two cameras. We have a camera that's going over Darren, and then we have a cut to a camera where we watch Darren take the key, and then we go back to the main camera and continue our game. So let's go ahead and go through this PDF of our director's notes. Typically, the way it works when you're creating a cutscene is if you work for a game studio or a film studio is you'll have a producer and a director and a couple of developers, and you'll have a roundtable discussion about the director's vision for the scene. After mocking up some ideas, you'll come up with ideas and you'll prototype by sketching out what you'd like. So here we have some sketches of the scene that we're going to be creating. So here we start with, we're going to fade in. So we're going to go from fade black to alpha. So we're going to have a black screen to alpha. And Darren is sneaking up to the security guard. And we're going to have the camera creep along Darren's left shoulder. So these arrows here represent panning, and I'm going to show you two methods on how to pan your virtual camera. So we'll start near the waist and then we'll ride up his shoulder so that we can get the shot that the directors want. From here, we're going to camera pan down to see Darren grabbing the card, and then we're going to pan back up so that we can see Darren's eyes in acknowledgement of success while the security guard remains asleep. From there, we'll go ahead and fade back to our game and continue on. When creating cutscenes, there's a process. And the process that we're going to be working with here is the first thing we need to do is we need to block out our scene. So blocking out our scene means that we're going to place our actors, we're going to play their animations, and make sure that the mood, choreograph, and environment settings are correct. From there, we're going to create virtual cameras, and we're going to compose our shot. We're going to discuss what the rule of thirds is, and we're going to use it to create the most aesthetically pleasing shot that we can get. From there, we're going to go ahead and incorporate our virtual cameras into Timeline, and we're going to create things like activation tracks so that we can actually steal the card off the guard. And then we're also going to do things such as create animation tracks, and we're going to work on creating damping for our camera to get more smooth movement. So we're going to do all of this step by step, and it starts with placing our actors. So I'll see you in the next video. To get started with this cutscene, we're going to place our actors. So when creating cutscenes, it's important to note that you're going to have game assets and then you're going to have actors. And these actors were created outside of Unity, rigged and animated, and they're their sole purpose of existence is just for the cutscenes. So that's why in some video games you may notice that the quality of the cutscene is beyond the quality of the video game. And that's because there might be more detail put into these cutscenes. So if you, to get started here, I want you to, in the hierarchy here, select your sleeping guard and move your mouse to the scene view and hit the F key to focus in on it. This is our game asset sleeping guard. So when you're playing the game, this will be the actual sleeping guard you see and can possibly interact with. What we have though is a replacement guard who is an actor, and we also have Darren as an actor. You're not going to use the same Darren that the game that the player is using. You're going to have an actor Darren. So to set up the scene, the first thing we need to do is we need to find our actors. In the project view, open up your game folder and go to your prefabs. Inside your prefabs, we have a folder called cutscenes. Inside your cutscenes are all of the actors for the cutscenes we'll be creating. The first cutscene we're going to create is the get card cutscene. And you'll see here in the preview, in the inspector on the bottom, that our actors is just a sleeping guard and Darren. Now go ahead and just drag that into the hierarchy. The position of this is going to be 0, 0. So what you want to do is you want to find that cutscene. So you can focus in on it by moving your mouse to the scene view and hitting the F key. And we need to bring it to our security guard. So just go ahead and just move it along the scene. All right, so we want to bring them all the way down to the security desk. Just keep moving them. It looks like it's on the Z, so just keep moving them back there. Focus in. All right, so we're just about there, and I will get you the exact coordinates that you want to use. So if you want to not go through the struggle of finding the location. And the idea here is that you want to line up the actor sleeping guard with the game asset sleeping guard. All right, so we'll lower him a bit. And I'd say that's about right. All right, I'd say right about here. So we're looking at, and actually that's way off. There we go. Bring him forward. Okay, I'd say that is pretty good. Okay, I'd say I'm pretty happy with that. So we're looking at about a negative 1.24, negative 1.2 and a negative 2, let's say. And then on the Z, we're looking at a negative 110. Okay, so right now we have our actors in place, and this is called blocking our scene. So our actors are in place, and as of right now, you'll notice that our actor has our get cutscene. They have an animator component, they have an animator controller, and what we can do temporarily is when a cutscene plays, what's going to happen is through timeline, we're going to deactivate our game asset. But for now, just to have an ease of creating this cutscene, let's go ahead and just disable it. But later, we will be re-enabling it, and our cutscene will be responsible for hiding the game asset and bringing the game asset back. So on our get card cutscene, let's go ahead and rename this to actors. So this is the sleeping guard cutscene actors. All right, so these are just the actors. And inside the actors, you have Darren and the office chair, which is our security guard. If you run this right now and you look in the scene view, they're going to be acting right away. Their animation will automatically play. Give it a minute here. I think it's loading up. Their animation, here we go. So you can see here, Darren is grabbing the key card, and then he looks up for success. So that's how the cutscene was created. It was rigged and animated outside of Unity, brought in, and as the developer, it's your responsibility now to create the cutscene by using timeline in Cinemachine. So our actors are placed, our sleeping guard is temporarily disabled, and the next video we're going to go ahead and dive into Cinemachine and create and compose our shot. The next step in creating a cutscene is to compose our shot. So again, I want to bring up the PDF that you should download with the following lectures. Every video for this court or for this section is going to have this PDF for you to download. So let's go ahead and just look at the vision the directors have for this, because right now we're playing the director. So what is the vision for this cutscene? We have a shot of an over-the-shoulder look of Darren and the security guard. And then we have another camera shot, and these two camera shots are the exact same, but they have some panning, right? And it's basically just looking at Darren and the security guard from the other side. So we have two cameras that we need to create. Now, in order to set up our shot, and this is called composing our shot, we need to first dive into Cinemachine, which again is just our camera, and that's it. It's a dynamic camera system that allows you to create cinematic cuts. So in Cinemachine, it's just an asset pack, and I've pre-compiled the asset for you. So I've shipped it with the asset, and it's right here, Cinemachine. In your personal projects, what you would do is you would go to the asset store, you would type in Cinemachine, and you would download it from the asset store. It's right here. It's a free tool by Unity Technologies. You would download it and import it into your scene, and you'd be good to go. I've provided the asset for you so that everyone can have the same consistent update that I have for the recording of this course. So let's get started. To create our cinematic cuts and our camera shots, the first thing we need to do is we need to create a virtual camera. And a virtual camera is basically a camera that will be used by the main camera to compose our shot. So let's go ahead and create a virtual camera. Go to Cinemachine at the top, create virtual camera. You'll see here that it created in the hierarchy a virtual camera called CM-VCam1. That stands for Cinemachine Virtual Cam 1. And what we're going to do is we're going to rename this, and this is going to be our over-the-shoulder Darren shot. So let's go ahead and call this CM for Cinemachine, and we'll call it over-the-shoulder, so OTS shot, OTS shot. Okay, and what we want to do now is we want to align this camera. And you'll see here that's just like any other camera if you find it in the scene. It's just a normal camera, like our main camera. It's just a virtual one. You can see the red rays, and this is what it's casting. What you see here in the game view is the view of the camera. So if you click off it, you can see here that it's now seeing what this virtual cam is. When you select that virtual cam, you get this view. And we're going to talk about this view in just a moment. But what I want to do now is I want to get this shot aligned properly. So this is where the scene view really comes in handy. We know what the director wants. We have an idea of the shot that we need to get. And so what we can do here is we can get that shot in the scene view, and we can actually align this virtual cam with our scene view. So for instance, our director, I'd say the shot was about right here where we're looking over Darren and we can see the security guard. What we can do now is you have two options. You can click on the virtual cam, you can go to game object, you can align with view, or you can use Control-Shift-F. So my preferred method is the hotkey Control-Shift-F, so I'll go ahead and do that. And you'll see here that my virtual cam is now placed where my scene view is. So right now, looking at our virtual cam, the shot is actually pretty good. And if we pull up our director notes, the sleeping guard cutscene PDF, you'll see here that it's pretty similar. So we may want to move in closer. We don't need to see Darren's feet. We just need to see him above the waist. And this is typically called a mid shot. So let's go ahead and control this camera a bit. So you have a couple options. You can keep the virtual cam selected. You can zoom in a bit. And then what you can do is when you're ready, you can go ahead and Control-Shift-F again, and that will reposition it. So I'd say right about here is pretty good. Now you may be wondering, what are these overlays on the game view? This here is your director's cut. Right here is you're the cameraman. So we have a couple views here, and if you look on the properties of this Cinemachine virtual camera, we have a few things. We have a status, which is solo, and we're going to get into that when we have multiple virtual cameras. We have a priority, which we'll also talk about. We have a look at, which means that we can force our camera to look at any object in the scene that has a transform. So for instance, if we wanted our camera to focus on Darren, then what we can do here is we can actually go into our actors, grab Darren, and we can drag Darren into this look at, and you'll see here that instantly our camera snapped to look at Darren. You can also have our camera follow Darren. Now for this cutscene, he's not necessarily moving, but just know that that's a possibility. So what we're going to do, I'm going to go ahead and remove that. We're going to put none and just select none. Okay, so let's go ahead and recompose our shot. Select it in the scene view, hit Control-Shift-F. I believe it's Command-Shift-F for Mac. Or again, you can go to Game Object, Align with View. So here is our shot. It looks pretty good. Now another thing we can do here is we can mess with the lens of the camera, which we're not going to do, but then we have our aim settings. And these aim settings allow you to basically control what's known as the dead zone and the soft zone. So if you actually modify the soft zone width, you can see exactly what that is. And this is basically what is important within your shot. Anything in blue is really what you want to focus in on. and you have these, and then you have a dead zone. And the dead zone is the square in the middle. And basically what that is you can increase this dead zone. And what will happen here is the camera will not move as long as whatever it's looking at in targeting is within that dead zone. As soon as it goes out of the dead zone, it will start to move. And as we begin animating this, you'll see exactly what I mean. We'll be messing with these settings momentarily. Now, when you're composing a scene, there is something called the rule of thirds. And the rule of thirds, you may have actually seen this before. It looks very similar to this. You don't have to do this, but I'm going to just show you what it looks like. It will look exactly like this. You'll see 3 even lines, or you'll see 2 horizontal and 2 vertical lines that make up 9 even squares. So it looks like this. You have a rule of thirds. You have a block here, a block here, a block here, 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 and here. All right, so we have 9 squares. And the idea of this is that when you're creating a shot or composing a shot, you don't want to have your camera dead center. The idea is that the eye, to get the most synthetic look, or the most aesthetically pleasing look, is to basically align your subjects or your actors within these intersecting points of the horizontal and vertical lines in these corners. So as you can see here right now, if I were to just kind of move this camera a bit, now we're on a dead center shot, right? So you can see here that we're just focused on the dead center. But a more proper shot here would be to actually align our actors in the corner here, giving more context to our environment. So as you can see here, and if I were to actually zoom out here, not only do we have a more aesthetically pleasing scene, but because we're using the rule of thirds where we want them to focus, we have more of an environment now. So we're getting like context of what's happening. We're in this environment, we have a sleeping guard, and here's Darren. And if I click off that, you can see that this shot is aesthetically more pleasing than if we just were to center it, which I'll do right now. You can see here, I'll center it right here, and there we go. So we have no context of the environment or anything. So this is called the rule of thirds. It's not necessarily a rule, it's more of a suggestion, but it's widely used throughout Hollywood and the film industry. I went ahead and reset my game view so that my aim settings, my dead zone and my soft zone, are how yours are. And what I would like to do now is I want to find, using the rule of thirds along these intersecting horizontal and vertical lines, I want to find a shot that is going to please a director. So what I want to do here, I'm just going to drag it a little bit forward. And we want above the waist, so I'd say right about here. So we have, I'd say, pretty much both characters within, so you can see here Darren's shoulder is intersecting, as well as this guard's body is intersecting. So here, if we look at this shot, we have context of the desk, and then we also have Darren. We have a perfect opportunity to pan up his shoulder. So the next shot that we want to create is on the opposite side where we watch Darren grab the card. So in order to do that, we're going to create another virtual camera. So this is our Cinemachine over the shoulder shot. Now we're going to go ahead and create our next shot of grabbing the key. So go to Cinemachine, create virtual camera. This will be CM-VCAM1. Let's go ahead and position this using the scene view to where we want to be, which is over here. And if we look at our PDF that we have, you can see here that this shot is going to be on the opposite side of the desk, looking directly at Darren with the guard sleeping. So let's go ahead and try and get this shot. So here we are on the other side of the desk, and I'd say we're right about here. So when I'm ready, I will select my Cinemachine VCAM1, Control-Shift-F, and you'll see here that it has been readjusted. And I may want to even turn my camera slightly a bit more, Control-Shift-F again. And I'd say we are set with that. We can go ahead and move the camera to focus on the key card now. So what's a good name for this shot? We have our over-the-shoulder shot, and then here, this would be our Cinemachine. Let's call this Cinemachine mid-shot. So here we go. So Cinemachine mid-shot. And what I would like to do now is, with using rule of thirds, we want to focus on Darren grabbing the key card. So we're going to control this camera view a bit, and we're going to see if we can align it with the key card. So here we are. We're going to scroll down a bit. And let's see here. So there's the key card on near his belt. Let's go ahead and move forward. So right now, what I want to do here is the key card is intersecting the rule of thirds with the corners. And I'm pretty happy with that. Now you'll notice here that if I click on the over the shoulder shot, I'm still on the mid shot. Now why is that? If you look on the over the mid shot and the over the shoulder shot, they have these things called status, which is solo. If you click that, you can switch back between the views. So if you want to see the over the shoulder shot, you click solo. If you want to go back to the CM mid shot, you can just click off it. Now you might be wondering, why is that the default camera? The reason for that is based on this priority. The higher thy priority, the higher the camera will be. So for instance, if I make this 11 for the OTS shot, this will now be the main camera. You can see here I click off, it's the main camera. If I want to see the mid shot, I have to make it a solo. Now you may be wondering how any of this actually works. The way this works is it takes the main camera and basically takes the position and rotation and puts it where the virtual camera is. And the reason why any of that is possible is because when we create virtual cameras, on the main camera, it created this component called Cinemachine Brain. This is what allows you to switch between virtual cameras, and it takes the camera position rotation and sets it to where the virtual camera is. Later, we'll be getting into post-processing effects so that each virtual camera could have its own post-processing along with the main camera. So as of right now, we have both of our shots, and I'm pretty happy with these shots. In the next video, we're going to go ahead and look at how we would pan these using timeline. This is going to be a quick video about cutscene organization. We want to make sure before our hierarchy gets super cluttered that our cutscenes are nicely organized so that when we need to come back to them, we can do so efficiently. So what I would like you to do is go ahead and create a new empty game object by in the hierarchy. You can go to create empty. You can also go to game object, create empty, or you can use Control-Shift-N. Once you've created that game object, set the position on the transform to 0, 0, 0 for the X, Y, and Z. And let's go ahead and name this Sleeping Guard Cutscene. So go ahead and call it Sleeping Guard Cutscene. Okay, Sleeping Guard Cutscene. The next thing I want to do is place our actors in here. So these are the actors. So let's go ahead and actually rename this to just actors because it's under the Sleeping Guard Cutscene. So we know that they are the actors for the Sleeping Guard. Place them under there. Don't modify the positions, just place them under there. The next thing I want to do is I want to organize our cameras. Create another empty game object by Control-Shift-N, or you can go to create empty. And let's go ahead and name this Cinemachine CM Virtual Cameras. And it's important that we keep our cameras organized. So put them inside of that game object, and then go ahead and place that game object. And I'm sorry, we should have zeroed out this position first. So go ahead and move these guys out of the object. Click on your Cinemachine Virtual Cameras. Set the position to 0, 0, 0. Put the Cinemachine objects inside. And then put the Cinemachine Virtual Cameras inside of the Sleeping Guard cutscene. To make sure everything works, if you just click on your OTS shot, go ahead and click solo. Make sure the shot is correct. Click on your CM mid shot. Make sure the shot is correct. That wraps up cleaning up our cutscene, and now we have a nice organized cutscene here. The last thing I want to do before we get started with timeline is commit our changes. So hop into, go ahead and save your scene. Go to collab, and we blocked our scene. So we blocked our scene, which is placing our actors. And then we also created virtual cameras. So we composed. So we blocked our scene and composed Sleeping Guard shot. Publish now, and we're good to go. I'll see you in the next lecture. In this video, I'm going to introduce you to Timeline. Now, unlike Cinemachine, Timeline is natively integrated into Unity. Timeline is an animation track that allows you to add and animate a timelined event. So say you had a 5-second cutscene about about our cutscene right now, I'd say is about 5 seconds. Within that 5 seconds, timeline will allow us to create camera cuts. We can animate our virtual cameras. We can pan. We can create audio effects with it. And we can also create what's known as activation tracks, which allow us to hide and activate game objects. So to open up timeline, what we need to do is we need to go to Window and then go down to Timeline. It's going to open up here next to our console animator asset store on the top here. What I would like you to do is drag this down below your game view. And in order to work efficiently with Timeline and Cinemachine, we need to be able to see our scene and our game view so that we can, together, we can refocus our camera and create composition if we need to. But what I want to do is make it so that we have an efficient workflow. So what I want you to do is I want you to take your scene view and your game view, and I want you to align them side by side like this and give it about a 50-50. And then here we have timeline and we can drag it out. Okay, so here we have timeline, and timeline is, like I said, it's just an animation track. So what I want to demonstrate first is how do we go in our sleeping guard here, how do we go from this over the shoulder shot, if I solo that, and then we do a cut, is what it's known as in the film industry, a cut to our mid shot. We use timeline to do that. So the first thing we want to do is we need to create a timeline asset. So you can see here, what we're going to do is we're going to select our sleeping guard cutscene. So select the high level object of our sleeping guard cutscene, and you'll see here that it says to begin a new timeline with sleeping guard cutscene, create a director component and a timeline asset. Hit create, and let's go ahead inside our Great Fleece, open up your game, and let's create a new folder in here called timeline. This is going to hold all of our timeline assets, which will be our individual cutscenes. And like I said, timeline is just a sequence of events. Create a new folder called timeline, open that up, and let's go ahead and call this, we'll go ahead and call this Sleeping Guard Timeline. Save, and you'll notice a few things happened. For starters, we have an animation track that got added here. This is an animation track here in the timeline editor, as well as on our object, we have an animator component and a playable director. Now what I would like you to do, because we're not actually going to be animating this game object, I want you to remove this component, and I want you to delete this component. So select it in the timeline and just hit your delete key. The only thing that's important here is our playable director. Our playable director basically controls when our timeline asset is enabled and plays. So for instance, you can see here that the update method for the timeline is going to be game time, and then it will play on awake. So what that basically means is that because it has a playable director, through code, when we want to trigger this cutscene, we're going to basically enable this game object, and it's going to automatically play our timeline asset. And you can see here that the timeline asset has a playable of Sleeping Guard Timeline, which is the asset that we created. So how do we get started animating between cameras? To get started animating our cameras, we need to first bring in our Cinemachine brain. So if you remember, when we created those virtual cameras, the main camera received a Cinemachine brain component. Now, in order for this to work, we need to add the Cinemachine brain to timeline. There's two ways we can do that. We can go to Add, Cinemachine Timeline, Cinemachine Track, and it's going to ask for a Cinemachine brain. You can drag the main camera to this slot, and we're good to go. An alternative is you can delete this, and you can actually drag your main camera directly into the timeline editor, and it will create that for you. Go ahead and select Cinemachine Track, and it will hook up the main camera just like this. So now that we have our main camera here, it knows that it's able to swap between virtual cameras, but now we need to actually tell it to do so. So in your timeline asset here, you'll notice that you may see 0 through 540 or some variation of numbers. These are frame rates. What I would like you to do is let's switch this to seconds. So there's a gear icon here. If you drop that down, you can go ahead and change from frames to seconds. And these are 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 second marks. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a virtual camera, and we're going to make it a 5-second cutscene of just our virtual camera. To do this, we're going to right-click in timeline, right-click, add Cinemachine shot clip, and you'll see here that it added this Cinemachine shot. And if you look in the inspector, it added a Cinemachine shot clip, and it's looking for a virtual camera. If you drop down your sleeping guard cutscene, if you go into your CM virtual cutscenes or virtual cameras, go ahead and drag in your over-the-shoulder shot. Drag it to this virtual camera, and you'll see here that timeline has automatically now mapped to that camera. And you can see here that we can go through it, and when the Cinemachine shot is done, it swaps back to whatever our main camera is looking at, which happens to be this shot. So let's go ahead and add another one. So here's our over-the-shoulder shot, and let's go ahead and drag this down to about, let's say the 2 second mark or 2.5 second mark. You can simply just drag the length of this clip. If you want your cut for how long we're on this virtual camera to be 8 seconds, you would drag it to 8 seconds. If you want it to be 2 seconds, 2 seconds. Let's go ahead and make the over the shot clip about 2.5 seconds. If you right click next to this, you can create another animation shot clip. And again, you're going to add your virtual camera, the mid shot camera. And you'll see here that if we go ahead and shrink this down so that now we have a 5-second clip, you can now use this white slider to preview your shot. And as we go, you'll see here that it instantly cuts to our mid shot. So here's our over the shoulder shot. At the 2.5 second mark, it's going to cut. And already right now you can see how we can create cinematic events. So, and you can also preview this. You can preview this in the animation timeline editor if you just hit this play button. So as you can see, I can hit play. It's going to play our shot, and then it's going to cut to this. Now, what if you didn't want to cut? Well, we have options such as blending. So what you can do is you can take this Cinemachine mid shot and you can drag it into the OTS shot. And when you do that, it creates this sort of crossfade, and it's going to blend that shot. So instead of actually just cutting to the shot, as you preview it, it will move and blend that shot. And what you can do is you can control how long it takes to blend it by starting the blend early. So if I go ahead and play this preview, you can see here we have a blend shot. Now that's not exactly what we want, but it is nice to know that there are some cases where you can actually blend your clips together and not just have a hard cinematic cut. So this is how we animate these cameras. What I would like you to do is go ahead and delete everything, and I would like you to try it again from scratch on your own and make sure that you can get back to this point. It's very important that you familiarize yourself with these tools. I'll see you in the next video. Now that we're able to cut between our cameras and timeline, and we can preview this, the next logical step is animating our actors. You'll notice that our actors are no longer animating. However, if we actually play the game, they will animate. So watch what happens if I actually turn this game object off, run the game, and I'm going to re-enable this game object. Because it has a playable director with the setting of play on awake, our cutscene is going to play instantly and you'll be able to see the animations. However, in timeline, during the preview mode, the animations aren't playing. We're going to look at how to fix that. Right now, you can see Darren's going to grab the card, we cut, and we can see him take it. Now, noticing this, there are a few things we may want to polish up here. For instance, during his animation, we may want to actually change this angle a bit, but it would be really helpful if as I'm transitioning between camera shots, I could also play the animation. Well, we're in luck. Select add in the timeline, and we're going to create an animation track. From here, it's looking for an animation or an animator component. If you click on our actors, you'll notice that they have an animator with a controller that plays the entire sequence of this cutscene. Drag that actor's game object into this animator slot. You'll see here that it now recognizes our actors, and what we can do now is add an animation clip from that controller. To do that, there's a hamburger menu next to the record button. Select that, add from animation clip, and these are all the animations that are part of our animation clips. So what I'd like you to do is add the get card animation. By adding that, it will add that animation clip and the length to your timeline editor. From there, you can actually take your white slider preview bar, and now you can visualize and preview the animation. So as you can see here, Darren is animating, we cut, and you can actually see him take the card. This is going to be much more useful when creating our cutscene so that we don't have to constantly play the game. We can just preview in our editor. So now that we have Darren animating, let's go ahead and focus on panning. I'll see you in the next video. The next thing we're going to cover is how to pan by animating our virtual cameras. So while off recording, I was looking back at the director's notes, and if we look at this image here, you can kind of see that in the view, the director wants to be able to see the entire desk, and the objective here is that we're going to pan up Darren's left shoulder. Okay? So while noticing that, I noticed that our cut didn't exactly have the desk, so I modified it to where now my shot is composed of the desk as well as the guard, and I'm in a good spot to where I can now pan up Darren's shoulder. So what I want to do here is, and if you'd like to follow along with my exact coordinates, if you select my Cinemachine over the shoulder shot, you can see my position values and rotation values. I didn't modify anything related to the Cinemachine component. So what do we have to do to pan this? Well, it's very easy. The first thing we're going to do is we are going to select our sleeping guard cutscene so that we can modify our timeline asset. And we are going to create an animation track. So select animation track. And the animation track that we're going to create is for our over the shot camera. So Cinemachine over the shoulder shot, drag it in here. Because we don't have an animator component on it, it's going to add one for us. Create animator on Cinemachine over the shoulder shot. And if you look on your Cinemachine over the shoulder shot object, it now has an animator component. What we can do now is we can actually begin recording. The first thing we need to do is in timeline, hit this little record button, and we can now modify the position, rotation, and properties of this virtual cam, and it will be keyframed or keyframe inserted into our timeline editor. So in order to get your first keyframe, we just have to move the camera a bit. So I'm going to go ahead and set this to -7.41 just to reset it so we can get the first frame. And what we want to do is we want to start the shot here, and I'm going to move into my timeline. So at what point do I need to be panning up Darren's shoulder? The entire point up until we cut. So about right here at the 2 minute and 50 sec, or the 2.5, I guess, or 0.5 of a second mark, around the 2.5 area here is when we're going to cut. So right before we cut, we want to go ahead and end our panning. So what I want to do is I want to select in my preview here, I want to move my camera up Darren's shoulder. So we move over and up. And let's go ahead and preview that. You can stop recording and we can go ahead and preview this. You'll see here that here's our shot. And as we go up his shoulder. He takes the card. And I'm actually pretty happy with that. So we go up his back. And if we want to, we can actually add in some rotation. Now, say you stopped recording and you want to change these keyframes. Well, unfortunately, you can't modify the keyframes directly in Timeline Editor just yet. However, if you double click it, it will open up the animation window. And this will bring up what's called the dope sheet. And in here, you can actually remodify the animation frames. And what I recommend doing is stacking this on top of your Timeline Editor. So here is the dope sheet for our over-the-shot camera. We have our first frame here, so if you want to reset that, you can simply select the keys and delete it. But what I would like to do is actually redo my ending shot. So what I want to do is I want to go over here to where the camera is. I'm going to delete the frames, and I'm going to re-record the shot. So back in Timeline Editor, I'm going to select record. And what I would like to do is move back up the shoulder. So we're going to go over and up. And I want to actually rotate to face more of the guard, like that. When I'm done recording, I hit stop. You'll see here that my keyframes are added. And we can go ahead and preview that in Timeline. So here we are. I go up his shoulder, and we rotated. Very subtle rotation, but for the most part, I think I'm very happy with this. We cut. And now we can go ahead and start working on this side. So let's go ahead and make sure we are good. If you see the position rotation things in your timeline editor like this, you can just click this box here to collapse the curves. And if we go ahead and modify this, or we can go ahead and preview this, just hit play. And you may notice that sometimes when you're playing, you have on certain cameras that this view selected. If you actually just click off in timeline, it's because that's what camera's actively selected. So if you actually just click off in timeline anywhere, it will no longer show those grid lines. Also, when you're selecting a camera, under aim, there is show guides, and that will turn that on and off. So let's go ahead and modify this. Let's go ahead and replay this. Take a look. And I'd say I'm pretty happy with that. So ultimately, ideally, I may actually want to go closer in on Derek, not just straight up. So I'm actually going to re-record this again for the third time. I'm just going to delete it, re-record. I'm going to select where I need to do this, where I need to end this animation, which is right here. I'm going to re-record, and I'm going to select the Cinemachine over the shoulder shot, and I'm going to move it over, going to move it up, and I'm going to bring it closer. And let's see how that looks. I'll stop recording. And that looks a lot better, I think. So let me go ahead and click off. And we will go ahead and preview this in timeline. And I'm much happier with that. So as you can see, this is already a pretty neat cutscene. So what we're going to do in the next video is we are going to focus on panning from the other side. We're going to pan down to see Darren grab the card, and then we're going to pan back up. I'm going to show you another method to panning other than just moving the camera like that. Real quickly, there is one more technique I want to show you with moving the camera. I'm going to delete this keyframe for the 4th time to demonstrate this. And on the first frame, what I would like to do is we're going to animate it about right here. And what you can actually do is use your scene view to get the shot you want. So here's Darren's shoulder. Select the record button, make sure you're recording. Select the over the shoulder shot and hit Control-Shift-F to align the view. And then what you can do is you can go ahead and modify it that way. So that's another way to get a panning for your character or for your cameras. And let's go ahead and see how that looks. So actually we can stay recording while we preview this, which is really nice. So we'll go ahead and run it. You can see here, so for this one, I'm no longer actually going into his back. I'm kind of starting off. So it looks like our first frame got a little screwed up. So what I want to do is I want to select the first frame, and we're going to rekey that. So here we're going to select the over the shot camera, and we'll go ahead and get our initial shot back. Control-Shift-F. This is our first frame. So let's go ahead and modify this to have it how we want. You can modify the rotation values. Let's go ahead and use our rule of thirds to get the over the shoulder look. And I'd say I'm happy with this. And then what I'll do is I'll hop back into preview and let's go ahead and check it out. And there we go. That is a cool looking cutscene. So I'm going to go ahead and stop recording. Go ahead and close these curves. Click off. I'm going to play it one more time. Beautiful. I'll see you in the next video. We're going to work on the grab the key card. Now that we have a panning effect going along Darren's shoulder, we're going to focus on the next cut, where we're going to pan down to see Darren grab the card, and then we're going to pan back up to view his success and acknowledgement of successfully getting the card without waking the guard. So here's how we're going to do this one. This one's going to be a little different. Now, you have the skills to be able to create the virtual cam animation, where you could have one shot starts at the top, pans down, and then you'd have another one at the start, and we can animate that. But what I'm going to show you is we're going to animate a game object, and we're going to use the look at property of our virtual camera, and we're going to do it that way, just so you have another way of creating animated virtual cams. So to get started, the first thing we need to do is we need to create a new empty game object that we're going to always be looking at for panning down and then up. So let's go ahead and create a new empty game object. You can hit Control-Shift-N. You can go to Hierarchy, Create Empty. You can also go to Game Object, Create Empty. I'm going to use the hotkey Control-Shift-N. From here, let's go ahead and rename this to Mid-Shot. Let's call it Mid-Shot Look At. And this object is what our camera is always going to be looked at. Now, I'm actually really happy with the default position. So let's go ahead and set that to -5, -2, and -113. From here, let's put this object inside of our actors so that it stays local to them. And inside our virtual cameras, open up your mid-shot cam, select it so we can see it, and go ahead and choose, you see this look at property, drag the mid-shot look at into the look at property, and you'll instantly see that our camera is panning down to look at it. Okay, so what we have here now is also there's a yellow dot. That yellow dot is the target look at object. So if I lock my inspector here, and if I select this mid-shot object and I drag it up, you'll notice that the camera doesn't move as long as this object is within the dead zone. As soon as I go out of the dead zone, you'll see here that it will then pan and snap to it, whether I'm going on the x-axis or the y-axis. So we can control the dead zone settings, and that's what we previously talked about. As long as the object is within the dead zone, it's not going to move. But as soon as it goes outside the dead zone, the camera's going to follow it. So what we're going to be creating here using this object is we're going to animate this object here. And what we're going to do is we're going to start here. And we're going to pan down so that we can watch Darren grab the key card. And then we're going to pan back up. And we're going to do that all by animating this object. So the first thing we need to do is get our starting position for the shot, which is going to be about right here, I'd say. And then what we'll do is we'll go ahead and pan down. Darren grabs the card and pan back up. Okay, easy enough, right? So let's go ahead, get your starting position, unlock the inspector if it's locked, select your sleeping guard cutscene. We need to create an animation track because we're going to be animating an object. Add, animation track, select your object and drag it into in the spot. So here we have our mid-shot look at. Because it doesn't have an animator component, it's going to ask if we want to create one. So we're going to create, and now we're ready to animate that object. The next thing we do before we start animating is we need to find where in the shot do we want to begin the animation. And we're going to start that right here. As soon as we switch our cut, we're going to start animating that object. So let's start recording. We have our starting position, which is here. So here we go. Let's go ahead and make our first frame. You can just move it a little bit and you'll get your first keyframe. The next thing we want to do is watch the animation. And at this point, we need to be looking at his hand. So let's go down. And let's go ahead and select our virtual cam so we can see our rule of thirds here. I'm going to lock this view for a moment. Let's go ahead and drag the mid-shot down. And about right here is where I want it to be. After this, let's go and keep moving forward. And from here to the end of the animation, we want to basically pan up and look at Darren's eyes of success. So let's go ahead and move up, create another keyframe, and we'll be about right here. Okay, let's go ahead and stop recording. Let's go and test that out. You can unlock your inspector, CM Virtual Cam, click your Sleeping Guard cutscene so we can play the preview, and let's go through it. So hit the play button, and occasionally your play button may freeze. The quick solution here is to just restart Unity and that will fix it. Let me go ahead and do that and I'll see you in a moment. Okay, so go ahead and select your Sleeping Guard cutscene and let's go ahead and preview this. So here we are crawling over Darren's shoulder. And you'll see here that our cutscene is exactly what the director wants, but it's very mechanical. It has that mechanical feel of just jerking straight down and then jerking straight up. So how can we smooth this out? Well, if we look at our virtual cam, we actually have on the mid shot these aim properties. And we know that as soon as we exit the dead zone, our camera is going to snap to it so that it can move along with it. That's where damping comes into place. Damping is going to allow us to smooth out that transition. So let's go ahead and increase the damping to about maybe 8 on the X and 8 on the Y. Ideally, you want to keep these consistent. So now we have it set to 8. Let's go ahead and select our Sleeping Guard cutscene. And let's preview this. So here we go, crawling over Darren. And you can see here, much smoother. There's also another thing you can do if you're not happy with the results, and that is smoothing out the curves. So let's open up our dope sheet by double clicking the animation here. That's going to bring up the dope sheet. And in here, you'll also have curves. And you'll notice that all we're doing here, right, is we're moving along the y-axis, which is the vertical axis. So all we can do here is you can actually modify these curves, and you can smooth it out even more if you wanted to. So for instance, if it's going out too far, you can move this so that it takes less time for it to actually get to its destination. And if you play this in the scene here, you'll see here that we can smooth along it and go up. If you want a drastic down pull, you can go ahead and smooth it and it will go very quickly down. So there are things you can do with the curves. I'm going to revert this back to how the original format is. I am happy with my results, but you're more than welcome to continue playing with it and smooth it out. So finally, let's go ahead and run through it one more time. Let's check it out to make sure we're happy with everything. Go ahead and hit play. Okay, very nice. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at activation tracks and how we can actually make the key card disappear. I'll see you in the next video. In this video, we're going to make it look like Darren actually stole the key card. So if we go ahead and select our sleeping guard cutscene and we go ahead and preview this, you'll see here that Darren's going to steal the card, but he never actually removes it from the guard's pants. So what we're going to do is we're going to use something called an activation track. Activation tracks allow us to enable and disable game objects during a timeline sequenced event. So what we want to do is when Darren gets to about right here, we want to make the keycard disappear and have it be gone forever. So it's going to be visible up until this point and then make it disappear. So again, to do this, it's done through an activation track. So let's go ahead and add a new track, and we're going to add what's called an activation track. Now this activation track, you'll see here it's active. We have two states on this. We can go ahead and set the length of it to be the full clip just to start. And the way it works is whatever game object is in it, right now it says the game object, whatever we place in it, will be active for the entire length of the scene. What we want to do is have it be active just until we actually steal the card. So let's go ahead and assign the card. The card is going to be inside our sleeping guard cutscene. Our actors go inside this office chair, and you'll see here a card. Select your sleeping guard cutscene, drag the card, click and hold, drag this card to that slot. And now you'll see here that the activation track is highlighted green and it's holding the card. Now watch what happens when I move this activation track to where we want it to be stolen. About right here, I'd say. So I'd say about right here, he grabs the card. Let's move the activation track to here. And watch what happens as Darren steals the card. It disappears. So that is what activation tracks allow you to do. They allow you to enable and disable game objects for the length of a cutscene. So we go ahead and remove the card. And we're good to go. So let's go ahead and preview this as a whole. We creep up Darren's back. We steal the card. And there you go. Pretty cool, right? I'll see you in the next video. In this video, we're going to look at creating a camera fade from black to alpha. So the first thing we need to do is we need to create a UI element. So let's right click in the hierarchy, go to UI, go to image. And let's call this camera fade to alpha. Camera fade alpha. And what we're going to be doing, the director wants us to have a black screen, which is going to have a half a second fade to alpha. So to do this, because we know we're going to be animating, and we can go ahead and view this process, we're going to take this alpha slider, and basically we're going from black to alpha 0. All right? So we can go ahead and start this off with a black square, and we want this to take up the entire screen. So we can change the anchor point of our rec transform. In the bottom right, we have an anchor point that allows it to freely go in all directions. Select that anchor, and then click in the left-hand bar here and select 0, 0 for top, 0 for right, and 0 for bottom, so that it fills the entire screen. Last but not least, you want to make sure that your canvas scaler is using scale with screen size so that this happens for everyone, not just relative to the actual pixels, but the relative to the scale of the screen, or it's going to scale with the screen size. Okay, now that we have that, what we want to do is we have this camera fade alpha. We need to animate that. So let's hop into our timeline here and let's create an animation track. So add animation track. And the next thing we want to do is let's add our canvas camera fade alpha. It will create an animator. Go into record mode, and let's go ahead and preview where we want this to occur. Now, if you can't see the beginning of your timeline, hold down the Alt key, and you can move all the way to the right. Okay, so here we are, and we want this to start at black. So we're going to select our camera fade alpha. To trigger our first keyframe, we're just going to move this alpha slider. We have our first frame, and about halfway in, about half a second, so at the 0.3 mark, we're going to select our color again, and we're going to move the alpha down to 0. You can close this out, stop recording, and you can test it out. You'll see here that we now have a beautiful black to alpha cut. And if we go ahead and play this, you'll see here it now has that cinematic feel. And you can see here it's really nice. Now, once again, if your timeline preview mode no longer is working, the quick solution to it is to just restart Unity. Alrighty, let's go ahead and preview this one more time. And as you can see here, it works extremely well. We have our nice fade to alpha, and here's our cutscene. Lastly, let's go ahead and clean up our level. So go ahead and take this canvas, which has our animated alpha fade, and we're going to drag this into our sleeping guard cutscene. This canvas is going to be dedicated to this cutscene. The 4 cutscenes we're creating, each one will have its own canvas with its own animated components so that we can avoid having any cross issues during the game. For our game, we'll have a dedicated UI menu that will be its own canvas as well. I'll see you guys in the next video. In this video, we're going to go ahead and clean up our scene and prepare for the next cutscene. So the last thing that needs to happen here is eventually through our game, we're going to trigger this cutscene through code. The idea here is that the game object will be off, and when it turns on, it has this play on awake feature checked, which will go ahead and play that cutscene, and then we'll give control back to the player. When we get into the coding aspects, that's when we're going to go ahead and set that up. So in the meantime here, what I would like you to do, let's re-enable our sleeping guard game asset. Let's go ahead and turn off our sleeping guard cutscene so that we're back to our game view in traditional working game. From here, we want to make sure that we have a nice, clean, organized way to keep track of all of our cutscenes. So I want to create another new empty game object by going to Control-Shift-N. You can also go to the hierarchy, create empty, or game object create empty. Let's rename this to cutscenes. And this is going to be an empty game object that just holds all of the cutscenes. You can set the position to 0, 0, 0 and drag the sleeping guard cutscene into cutscenes. From there, we're all set. And if you turn this game object back on, you can go ahead and preview your timeline as if nothing happened. You'll see here that I have the guard active in the scene. We'll get into how to properly disable that when we get into the coding aspects later in the course. I hope you've learned quite a bit about Timeline and Cinemachine, because moving forward, it's going to be up to you to create the cutscenes. I held your hand for the first one. Moving forward, you're going to be given challenges, and you're going to have to experiment and research how to implement things such as voice acting as well as sound effects. I'll see you guys in the next video.